Well, today, for the first time, Powell basically admitted that inflation is not transitory. Here is exactly what Powell said about transitory inflation. This is in quotes. Quote, "It's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean." Okay, so it's time to retire the word transitory. Why? Well, because it's not true. And it's never been true. That's the Fed's way of admitting that it was wrong, right? Because we're retiring the word because we got it wrong, because the word was never appropriate, and that's why we're retiring it. But I also think it was funny because not only is Powell admitting that he was wrong without actually coming out and saying, I was wrong, it kind of reminds me of Arthur Fonzarelli from Happy Days. Most people are probably too young to remember that, but Arthur Fonzarelli could never say he was wrong. And whenever he tried to say that, it would be like, I was woo. He could never get the words "I was wrong" out of his mouth. So he would just slur a little bit and say, I was woo, and that meant he was wrong. Well, Powell's not actually saying he was wrong, but hey, let's just retire this word. And then he said that we need to come up with a new way to explain more clearly what they meant. No, that's the last thing the Fed wants to do. The problem is the Fed was clear when they said inflation was transitory, because what transitory means is kind of temporary. It's just not a real problem. We don't have to worry about it. It's going to go away. The problem isn't that the Fed wasn't clear. The problem was that the Fed was wrong. That was the problem. And the reason that the Fed became unclear is because when it first became obvious that the Fed was wrong, that's when the Fed tried to change the definition of transitory so that they could still look right. That's what created the confusion. It was the Fed trying to confuse the public as to what transitory means. Now, what they want to do is come up with a new lie to confuse the public again, because the transitory lie ain't working anymore because they've twisted it into too big a pretzel, and now they need something else. I described this supply problem precisely from day one. You go back and you listen to my podcasts from March of 2020, right? When COVID first hit and the Fed announced its response, when it slashed interest rates down to zero and relaunched QE, what specifically did I say was going to happen? I said this was the worst thing the Fed could do because COVID was an inflationary event in that it was sidelining production. I mean, after all, how can you shut down the economy, close factories, furlough workers, and then somehow be surprised by the fact that there's a shortage of stuff? I talked about that. I specifically said there were going to be widespread shortages of stuff due to the shutdown of the economy. And of course, I'm not brilliant to figure that out. You have to be an idiot not to see that. It's not that I'm so smart. It's just that they'd have to be so dumb. And I don't think they could possibly be that dumb. I just think now they're telling a lie to try to explain why they got inflation wrong by trying to claim that they really didn't get it wrong, that it was only because of this crazy thing that nobody could have possibly seen coming, when anybody with even a small amount of common sense would have seen it coming. My policy prescription at the time, what I said the correct monetary policy would have been back in March of 2020, was to contract the money supply, the opposite of what the Fed was doing. Why did I say the Fed needed to contract the money supply? Because production was contracting. The economy was generating less output. And if you're producing less stuff, prices are going to go up unless you shrink the quantity of money so that the supply of money goes down along with the supply of goods, which was the original purpose of the Federal Reserve, to provide the economy with an elastic money supply. And that meant a money supply that contracted as the economy contracted and expanded as the economy expanded. But the Fed did the opposite of what it was intended to do. It expanded the money supply into a contracting economy, the most boneheaded of all monetary policies. And I described in detail why this was so inflationary, because people were going to have more money to buy less stuff. And so the only thing that could happen is the price of that stuff would go up. So to say that nobody could have seen this coming, right, is disingenuous at best, but an outright lie at worst. But what the markets really should be asking, or investors, is if the Fed got this wrong, which they clearly did, what else are they getting wrong? And of course, remember, one of the reasons I said from the beginning that the Fed was wrong about inflation being transitory, I said it's the same way they were wrong about the subprime problems being contained. I said inflation was as transitory as subprime was contained. And I was right again. Of course, I was right in real time when the Fed was saying subprime was contained, and I said it wasn't. I said subprime was the tip of a huge iceberg, and that's exactly what it was. Well, I've been saying the same thing about inflation, that the inflation that we've seen thus far is not only not transitory, but the tip of an inflation iceberg. And the Fed still doesn't acknowledge the existence of that iceberg. But because Powell uttered these words, because he said we need to retire the word transitory, immediately when those words were spoken, the dollar index was down about 70 points. It was a big decline, and it rallied back to positive. Now, it didn't close positive, but it rallied to positive. Gold, which was up about $20 an ounce before Powell made that statement, sold off negative and closed negative. It was down about $10 on the day, more than a $30 reversal in the price of gold, simply because Powell acknowledged that inflation wasn't transitory. In fact, he did more than that. He actually admitted that inflation is widespread, that it has now moved beyond just those few commodities that were linked to the reopening, which of course was a lie when he said it, and I pointed that out. But now he's admitting that it's broader inflation, that the threat is bigger than he thought, and we need to deal with it. And that is what scared the hell out of the markets and caused the sell-off in gold, the bid in the dollar, and the sell-off in the stock market, because the stock market was trying to rally back until those words derailed that rally and sent the market crashing back down to new lows. Now, Powell did, though, come kind of close to admitting that he was wrong, but he didn't really admit it, because he was asked about, hey, inflation, it's constantly running hotter than you thought. Like, what did you get wrong, right? In hindsight now, where were you wrong? And so what Powell said was that, well, we kind of only got one thing wrong, but you can't fault us for that because nobody could have possibly got this right. And what Powell said the Fed got wrong was it didn't see the problems in the supply chain happening. And after all, according to Powell, nobody saw this coming. And it certainly wasn't in any of our models, because how could you model something as crazy as supply chain bottlenecks and shortages? So since nobody could have possibly known that this was going to happen, well, clearly, since our models didn't incorporate something that nobody could have known, well, that's why we were wrong in thinking inflation was transitory, because, you had this unknown thing out of left field nobody could have possibly predicted. So in a way, we really weren't wrong, because, we're not gods, right? We can't just see into the future. We don't have a crystal ball, right? So you can't expect us to do the impossible and foresee something that nobody could possibly even imagine. So, but for that, we got everything right about inflation, but, you can't hold us responsible for something like this, which is so laughable because it's not the only thing the Fed got wrong. The Fed got a lot more wrong than supply. In fact, what it really got wrong was demand, right? Because this is not about supply only. It's about massive demand. Now, where did that demand come from? Well, it came from the Fed, and it came from other central banks that flooded the economy with money. People who were sitting at home not working got checks from the government to go out and spend it. And in fact, the U.S. government told a lot of people, hey, don't use that money to pay your rent because your landlord can't evict you. Just go buy more goods made in China. Run the deficit up even more. So it was government policy, both the Fed policy and congressional policy, that combined to create all sorts of demand. And the demand was also way underestimated by the Fed. But Getting back to supply, to say that these supply shortages were something that nobody foresaw and that nobody could have possibly have foreseen because it's so out of left field, it's so crazy that nobody could have possibly predicted it, is a farce on its own, because it wasn't impossible to have figured this out in advance. In fact, it was impossible not to have seen this coming. This was the most obvious problem, and how the Fed could have missed it is beyond me, which makes me think they didn't miss it. They're just lying now and pretending they didn't see it because they can't possibly have been so blind.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information, and it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where do you start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.